spot is.
All right, thanks everyone. Really appreciate you joining us today, and wanted to just take a few minutes now to get us started. Welcome and thank you. I do expect we'll have a really good conversation this afternoon. My name is Tommy Ferguson and I'm the Executive Director of Capital City Village. We're a local nonprofit dedicated to helping Austin seniors age well in their own homes through a blend of supportive services from trusted volunteers, as well as interesting programs like the one this afternoon to keep people socially connected and engaged. To find out how you can get more involved through membership, volunteering, and supporting our mission, please visit capitalcityvillage.org. We appreciate you joining Capital City Village this afternoon for another installment of our Writers Series. Today, we're in conversation with award-winning writer Elizabeth Crook. She's the author of 5 novels, including The Night Journal, which received the Spur Award from Western Writers of America, Monday, a Kirkus Review's Best Book of 2014, and winner of the Jesse H. Jones Award from the Texas Institute of Letters, and The Witchway Tree, which is currently in development for film. Elizabeth has written for the Southwestern Historical Quarterly and Texas Monthly, and is co-writer with Stephen Harrigan of the screenplay for The Witchway Tree. She lives in Austin with her family. Elizabeth, welcome, and thank you so much for speaking with our group today. So I'd like to start off asking about how you got interested in writing, and in particular focused on historical fiction centered here in Texas. So if you would like to take it away.
Okay, thanks, Tommy, and hi, everyone. Yeah, so I think that the reason I became a writer is because, to begin with, my mom read to us every single night for like 3 hours a night to my brother and sister and me. And it was just incredibly formative. And we really got, it was sort of what we did instead of watching TV at night, or something. It was just kind of the family time. And we just became very accustomed to jumping out of our real lives and into another world. And usually into a world of the past. She read a lot of historical fiction to us. She read the Dickens stories to us. She read a lot of tough stories to us, where there was hardship and suffering. But it just made us very comfortable, I think. Going, that again is my dog. If you hear lots of background noise, just very comfortable moving from our, real lives that we lived during the day to some lives that were extremely different from ours. And that is what that's what we did every night. And so I really credit her with that. And also just the sense that my family, I was very fortunate in that my family valued books. I mean, it was usually what we got for Christmas from my grandmother. I have so many signed books from my grandmother, and she always made notations in the front, whether she thought we would like the book or not, or whether she approved of the book. But I have lots of books from her, and it was just a valued thing. So I was very fortunate in that. And I think that's what was formative. And that's probably, as far as it being historical fiction, why I became really interested in history, because a lot of the books were set in other time periods and in other countries. And it wasn't that I traveled so much or anything, but that was sort of the way that I could experience the world, so.
Oh, that is nice to hear. And yeah, I think it really does start at an early age when people, get you interested in books and all the sort of the world that opens up to you.
Mm-hmm.
And also, just from what I know of it, it strikes me that your writing is also very much born of Texas. So whether it's the 19th century quest to hunt down the demon panther in The Witchway Tree, or even the tragic events of the UT Tower shooting 50 plus years ago, as told in Monday. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the importance of a sense of place in your writing.
Yeah, I mean, I always admire these writers that are able to really get to know another country or another, area of the country, and feel as, you have to really feel at home in a place when you're writing about it, because you're going to be there every day. You need to know the vegetation, you need to know, just the way the place feels, and if you haven't spent a lot of time there, it's very hard. The farthest away that I wrote, I mean, my first book, The Raven's Bride, was about Sam Houston's very disastrous, first marriage, which is what launched him into Texas in the first place, because he was governor of Tennessee. He married a young woman who promptly left him 11 weeks later for reasons that were never officially disclosed, and he was vilified, and there were all kinds of rumors as to why she left him. His effigy was burned on the courthouse square, and he left incognito and in disgrace, by steamboat at night, and ended up in Texas a number of years later, and that changed history dramatically. So I did write about Tennessee. I did have to go, spend time there and dig through a lot of archives. This was I published that book in 1991. So it was way before the internet. And I was just, dependent on a lot of library archives, a lot of microfiche and things like that. So, really that was, toward the east. And then I wrote, the Night Journal takes place in New Mexico. And I just had to spend time there and get the feel of the air and the altitude and how different it was. But they were both the United States, and they were both books were set in the past, and sort of in the West, to some degree. And so there was that sense of Texas being right there. And I don't know. I mean, I'm a homebody in my real life. I'm not somebody that travels a lot. And just sees the world, but I just feel very comfortable. I grew up in San Marcos, and then went to a couple of years at Baylor, and then a couple of years at Rice, graduated from Rice, lived in Houston, and then moved back to New Braunfels, the area, and then ended up in Austin. So kind of the Central Texas, and this area is what I know. The vegetation, the rivers. I mean, it's just I feel very comfortable here, and I think that's why I keep setting books in this area. And plus, once you learn, once you've written a book about a certain place, it's easier to go back to that place than to start someplace totally new. With your research. So mine have jumped around in time periods. They've jumped around a little bit in place, but they don't go very far.
Right. And so you write what you know or what you've experienced a little bit, and that brings an authenticity to the writing. Certainly if you know a place a little bit when you're writing about it, or even developing characters that would have grown out of it. I'm really curious if you could talk a little bit more about that research piece of it. I mean, you're mentioning things about Sam Houston that, most of us, or I can speak for myself, wouldn't have known otherwise. Certainly we always think of him as, a Texas hero. We don't have all the backstory. So in that research process, I mean, how do you dig through things? You mentioned like really the nuts and bolts of like going through microfiche and finding all those sources, but, are you ever taken aback by some of the revelations that come up?
Yeah, the revelations are a lot of fun, and they are what guide the story, because often, your story ends up being very different when you find some strand, some facts, some, place that you had not thought to go when you plot out the story. And I never plot out a story very thoroughly beforehand, because I guess I'm not creative enough to think it through to the end. So I often, am guided by the research as I go, even not, sort of panic at the end of the chapters, what's going to happen next, and I'm doing research the whole time. I do a lot of reading. I mean, extensive reading and note taking, and oh my gosh. I mean, I think Rick has a picture. I don't know if he is able to share it on the screen or not, but just of like the calendar that I put together when I did the book on the Texas Revolution, which was called Promised Lands, and it was my second book. I published that in 1993, and every single day of the Texas Revolution, I have these little squares that notate what happened, where the armies were, what kind of armaments they had, how many people were with them, what the weather was, just by reading every single thing I could get my hands on about the Texas Revolution. So it's incredibly time consuming if you want to get your facts right. And I always want to get my facts right. I'm very meticulous with that, because if I'm reading historical fiction, I just want to be able to trust the author to be telling the story as it, would have happened. I mean, I have to take liberties because, for instance, with the story with Sam Houston and Eliza Allen, nobody knew what happened. So I had to fill in the gaps. But as far as what was known and the people who were involved in that time and in the political, scene of that day in Tennessee, and whom Sam Houston and Eliza Allen knew, I stuck to the facts. But then I had to fictionalize when I was really, giving them dialogue, giving them motive, and saying in the end what happened. So that, was in the end a little unnerving, because I felt like I was taking liberties with the lives of other people, people who had lived in certain reputations. So from then on, I just did, if I have historical figures in there, they are not my point of view characters. They are not my main characters. And everything they do or say would have been something that was recorded in history, but I have my fictional characters that I place into the context of the story, which relieves me of that burden of feeling the ghost looking over my shoulder all the time and saying, I didn't say that, I wouldn't have said that way. And it gives you a lot more license, liberty to make up a story, because these people are your people. And as long as you fit them realistically within the framework of the history as it happened, then they can live their lives that way, So, but yeah, the research is, I mean, I can't even begin to say, it's years before I even start writing, where I'm just reading, underlining. I mean, it would be like, let me just randomly grab some book over here where I would have made notes.
Sure. Yeah.
In the back. Let me see which, they're just, every book would have, all of this, like in the back, I always write, pages of, different notations of pages that, would have had interesting, important things on them, and that I might want to go back to. And I would, write that on the back of all the pages and in the margins. And that's how every book, that I write, I mean, every book that I read for history would end up looking. So that's, this would be 30 books like this, in this, for a book that I write. So it's time consuming, but it gives me lots of material to go back to. I can, then remember and figure out, okay, well, I know that in that one book, I had a notation about how much that horse sold for, in 1868. And, or the accoutrements to the wagon, or the whatever it is. And I can go back through those pages and find those things marked and get the facts right. So, yeah.
And so you can see that, or it sounds like you're fairly meticulous and thorough about making sure that anything that's represented or called upon to give sort of the essence of the story or contribute to it is very legitimate as far as like how it fits in and why and all of that. And I'm curious, do you, especially for like Monday, which is, certainly not recent, but more recent than some of the others as far as the context and the setting, did you find yourself interviewing and talking to people and developing that and putting that together, since you actually could still get a hold of firsthand accounts of it?
Yeah, that was the easiest on the research because, I mean, I knew people obviously who were wandering around UT in the 1960s and who were there. And now I did talk to a number of people who were there and who participated in a lot of ways. I didn't talk to any of the people who were wounded, just because they had almost all of them had recorded their stories, and given interviews before, and I could find that. And I didn't see any point, as a novelist, in going back and bothering them to tell their stories again when I could find records of those. But like Cliff Drummond, who was one of the great people who ran out and saved a lot of people. He was really helpful. Neil Spelse was really helpful, and he was wonderful. And so we got to be friends. And, that is just how, I did. I talked to a lot of people who were there, but not anybody who was wounded. And then I was able to go from the story, with the story from there.
Well, I'm curious in a few minutes when we open up the Q&A, because I know of at least a couple of people on the call today that were in Austin or possibly even on campus during that time, so they may have their own questions for you. I did want to turn a little bit away from research and talk a little bit about inspiration for your work. Specifically, I've heard a little bit in some of the interviews and so forth, and what I read up on before our talk today, specifically around the Which Way tree. I heard a story about the inspiration for it and wondered if you'd talk a little bit about that and share your tale about that.
Mm-hmm. Yes, what happened was that my son, when he was 14, decided to camp out at a place that we have out in the hill country near Camp Verde. And so he was with another friend whom we didn't know well, but, before they left, we were all staying out there at this place. And because it was my daughter's birthday, she's much younger, and we were giving her a birthday party, having, just some people come out and stay for the weekend and, make hot dogs and have cake. And so he went off to go camping, and he didn't know a lot about camping, but so I said, do not start a fire. You can go, they were going to go to a little cabin on the property. And I said, don't take any matches. Don't, just go and we'll bring you something, or we'll check on you or something like that. So they left. They had almost nothing. They had nothing with them. They did have matches. I didn't know that. But then, we went to check on them about 6:00 at night. They'd been gone about 6 hours, and to see if they needed some food and things, and they weren't there, and they had never gotten to the cabin. And so we started searching for them all over the property, and just driving these dirt roads and yelling into the canyons. And, finally, we called the sheriff in Bandera, and called the sheriff's office, and he sent some people out to help search. And I just didn't know. I thought, did they go for the road and decide to go hitchhike to Bandera or some stupid thing? They were 14. You do stupid things at 14. Did they, what happened? Where are they? And so we couldn't find them for hours. So they finally called in helicopters, and they did a search. And during the whole thing, the deputy sheriff was walking with 2 other people who were searching. And because the people staying out there with us just became part of the search party, and then, DPS, the highway patrol, different people, wildlife, all showed up to help. And he said, I smell a cat. And they shone the light up on the bluff, and there was this huge mountain lion trailing them weirdly. And we had just discovered that this was the canyon that the kids had gone down, because we found they had taken a boat part of the way. The oars were wet, so we knew this was the way they'd gone, and they were down that canyon. And so the helicopters, finally spotted them, way on another property. And the sheriff got in the helicopter and went out and hiked down and brought the boys out. They were lost. They had gone way too far down the wrong canyon. And it didn't occur to them we would be looking for them. They just thought they would camp for the night. They had started a fire. They had done it in a wise way, deep in a ravine. And that's how they were found. That when they saw the helicopter, they had doused the fire, because they thought, oh, it must be drug runners. There are never helicopters out here. But they did get, we did end up, getting them home. But the sheriff said to me, when he brought them back, he said, "I don't mean to scare you, ma'am, but when I got there, that cat had its eyes on your boys." So just that image, of, the mountain lions. So I became really obsessed with mountain lions. And they were called panthers back in the day. They are just the yellow cats, the yellow mountain lions. I became really obsessed with them, and I just started researching them and reading everything and reading news stories every night. And, there'd be some mountain lion that had, eaten a chihuahua out there in Montana or something. And it would be weirdly thrilling to me. And so I thought I need to do something, more constructive with this. And so I envisioned this attack. I knew all about at that time how they attack. And I ended up, writing a very different story from what we went through, because this story takes place during the Civil War, and with characters, who are not my son. But it was the mountain lion and that incident that got me even interested in that subject.
Wow, that's fascinating. It just really is, just that's the way that it germinates and that it comes to being. And it sounds like that research process, again, very thorough, very meticulous, just, I mean, maybe bordering on obsession to really just, really look into it and get a feel for it. And I'm curious too, I do want to make sure that we have time and open it up for questions, but before we do, just sort of generally, could you talk a little bit about your experience with what I tend to call the writing life, that how you blend that with your personal life and how you come across, in the industry with dealing with publishers and so forth, and how that whole process has worked for you just on a personal level, like what that's been like for you. I know it's different for everybody, but I'm really curious because, it's quite a span of now a couple of decades and some, great work and wonderful reviews. And so I know, having been a little close to it, that it's not always easy to navigate that.
Yeah. No, I started with a lot of rejections. I think that's the way a lot of writers start. You get it sent back to you and you write it and you try and make it better. And, one editor might suggest that, this is the problem, or some others might suggest this, and they might be totally opposite kinds of suggestions. It's very confusing and frustrating. But I have, I've been very lucky, and I've landed with really good editors. All of my editors have been just excellent, and I love the one I'm with now, Ben George at Little Brown. And I've moved around, in with publishers. I have an agent though whom I love, who's been steady, and she's great. And so it's very different from what it used to be. It used to be that you wrote your book and then you got some reviews and they put them in the mail to you, and you got them and you read them and that was it, and nobody else saw them. And now, everything, you can see your reviews online almost before they come out the next day, and there's a lot of commentary on, Goodreads or on Amazon. So you can, you have to kind of navigate how much do you pay attention to that? How deeply do you care? I tend to read some of the reviews because I think I learn from them. If there's something somebody, has an issue with the book, and if I see that more than once, I think, oh, well, maybe I didn't get that right. But, I've been lucky in that people usually like my books, and I feel good about them. And I kind of know the place I am in the publishing world. I don't have a big breakout bestseller, but the people who have read my books have liked them, and that's, and they've done well. And as long as they do well enough that you can publish another one, and that your publisher is happy with you and makes some money, or, is not disgruntled because you were a big money pit or anything, then you can, you can stay in the business. And so that's what I do. I like I said, I've been really lucky. I have a great agent and really good publishers and editors all along the way.
Sounds like a good journey actually for you. Yeah.
Mhm.
I do want to make sure we have time for questions. So I do want to open that up. Just a note, folks, I can't see everyone. We have a pretty good crowd right here today. So if you would either use the raise hand function under the reactions icon. Or you can chat, type something in the chat if you'd like to pose a question, or I'll scan and just see if you want to wave at me really quickly, or just unmute and hop in. But I do see a hand raised from Gail. So Gail, if you want to go ahead and unmute and then ask your question.
Yeah, I was wondering what you find to be the most difficult part of your writing process.
The most difficult part for me is always plot. I start with a really vivid image or idea, and I feel like, you know, as I get to each scene, I'm able to write it to where I'm happy with it. But the issue is always what's going to happen next. And you know, I kind of feel my way. I mean, I think a lot of writers have more vision in that sense, and I kind of grope my way through it. And, you know, when I've talked about it before, I usually discuss it as kind of like finding your way in a fog, you know, in that you go down these wrong roads and you're lost, and, you know, then you have to double back and you have to lop off those chapters because they didn't work, or you have to get rid of that character who was superfluous to your plot. And but I have enjoyed writing that way because I then, you know, end up in these places that I would not have thought to go if I was trying to just plot it from beginning to end and know what was going to happen next. And I don't know, for me, I don't think I would find that method of writing as interesting, because that's, you know, kind of like a dot to dot. Once you make up let me see if I can, oh, that's my daughter. Let me just, but she's just upstairs. She's calling me to bring her the dog. She doesn't know I'm on a Zoom. I'm sorry. Let me just tell her. Yeah. Hey, honey, I'm on a Zoom. Can I call you back? Okay. No problem. Okay. All right. Bye. Yeah, love you. Okay. So
I have one of those upstairs too. So,
you know, you end up with these things that you wouldn't have thought to put in the beginning when you're writing that way. And I just find it more interesting. And but it's not efficient. It's not going to lead me to write, you know, a book every year or every 3 years. You know, it's usually 5 or 7 years, and you waste a lot of time that way. But I really have found that my books, I think they have been more interesting simply because I am on that journey with the characters. And it's also, you know, you just think, what realistically would they do now? What would they say now? And instead of trying to fit them into a plot that you've already made up, you know.
That's great.
Gary asked the first question.
I'm sorry. Yeah. So I think I want to go. Let's see. Maury has a question.
Gary was first.
Okay, Gary, and then we'll go to Maury, and then we've got a couple of notes in the chat. Go ahead, Gary.
Hello. My question is who your agent is and how you found your agent.
Okay. My agent is Gail Hockman. And before that, it was Rafe Segalian. He's great too, but he does mostly nonfiction. And I found my agent through a friend I made who was a writer, and she publishes really wonderful books, and she has a lot of agents under her. It's the Hockman and Brandt, you know, agency, literary agency. She has really good agents under her. And the way, if you're looking for an agent, I mean, what she always recommends is don't just get a name and go, you know, for that agent. Pick out some books that are like the ones that you've written, and or the manuscript you have or whatever, and find out who those agents were, you know, because agents have certain tastes like everybody else does, and they're looking usually for a certain kind of thing. And so, you know, you just go to the bookstore and pick out books and look in the acknowledgments, and they will almost always acknowledge their agent. And then you contact that agent and you say, I have this book and it, you know, resembles so-and-so, and it just gives you more of a credible way in. Because you've done your research, and they appreciate that, you know, and appreciate that you've picked them specifically for some reason. So with mine, my first agent, gosh, that was 30 years ago. I'm not even sure who introduced me or, you know, put me in touch with that person. I had but my second agent, it was, through another writer I'd met who actually was also an editor. And he said she was wonderful, and that's Gail. And so, and she and I became good friends. I love Gail. And so I've been very fortunate. She stuck with me through all my books, except the first two were the ones that were published through a different agent.
That's great.
Thank you.
I think, Maury, you had your hand up next.
Yes. I have two questions. First of all, I've noticed that your books have different prices, and I'm wondering how you or whoever does that decides what price a book should have on it. And then my second question is, are there ever any superfluous characters or actions in a book, or does everything in a book lead to something?
Oh, okay. Good questions. The pricing is totally up to the publisher. They put that on there. I never know what my books are going to cost. And the books, they vary, of course, there's usually a hardback. And then I've been lucky enough that they have always done paperbacks of my books. And those, look different and have very different kinds of cover art, and are priced differently. And as far as, tell me the second question again. It was
Superfluous characters or superfluous actions?
Yeah. Yes. So I have my friend Steve Harrigan read everything that I write before I send it off to my agent or my publisher. And he has, a couple of times suggested, do you really need this character? And it's like, I'm always very defensive in the beginning because you've written this character into the plot. But then, you start thinking about it and here's the way it is. You put a lot of stuff in there because it's a historical fiction and you found a bunch of interesting stuff and you have your characters as you want them. But then it's like having them in the boat, and the boat begins to get too heavy and it begins to sink, and you've got to throw a lot of stuff overboard. And sometimes it's a character and sometimes it's just, storylines that you were fascinated with, but they actually happened like in the next county and don't really move your plot forward. So the rule of thumb is if it doesn't inform the reader specifically about a character or move the plot forward, it goes overboard. And so, yes, so I get rid of a lot of stuff. And I have gotten rid of characters, and I have gotten Steve to get rid of one of his characters, which felt like justice. But, because the way you envision a book in the beginning, it begins to change, and you'll find out that some characters really are just becoming more interesting and some characters just never quite get there, and they can go.
That's great.
Thanks.
We'll
Think
move
Sue
now.
is next.
Sue is, okay, go ahead, Sue, unmute.
Well, it's actually Mark.
Oh.
Elizabeth, I enjoyed your book immensely, and
Thank
we a couple of days in Camp Verde, which, I would recommend. And we went to the store.
Mhm.
I went immediately in their book room, and they didn't have your book. So, and it's about 6 months ago, and I talked to them. I said, "What are y'all doing not having her book?" But they did. I don't know if they have contacted you or anything, but they do have the history of Camp Verde that I bought. It's a little by a historian. And what impressed me, I think if I'd read that little book first, it would have been rather dull. But reading your book and then reading the history was fascinating to see how you built in the facts. I thought you just did a great job, and I actually fact checked your book a little bit reading the history book. So thank you for that. And my question is, the format was interesting between the little boy and judge and writing back and forth formally. How did you arrive at that format?
Okay, first of all, thank you for, reading the book, for liking it, and for suggesting it to the Camp Verde store. I should have thought of that. I think the way back, maybe they had some copies. I don't remember, but, but I that would be a good place, for the book.
Oh, it'd be perfect.
Yeah. Yes, the judge. Okay, so the way the book is designed, basically, since the story in the book is told by a 17-year-old kid who was younger when it happened, he would not have sat down and written this tale on his own and for nobody. And so there had to be some kind of a mandate for him to do so. It just would have been unrealistic. for instance, in True Grit, which is a wonderful book, really one of my favorite all-time books. And she writes the story, she tells her own story, but she tells it as an older person. And she's looking back, and that makes total sense. For Benjamin to have written it at 17, because I wanted his naivety, I wanted his earnestness, I wanted all of these qualities of him at that age to come through. And if he had told it as an older person, just as a reminiscence, totally out of context, only the story of the panther, he would have lost all of that. So I needed somebody to make him write it when he's 17. And so there comes the judge, because they did try after the Civil War. During the Civil War, there were a lot of depredations, a lot of crimes against the German settlers who were loyal to the Union. And they were killed, they were tortured, they were, it was pretty brutal. And so they, after the close of the Civil War, all over the United States, they tried these war crimes of civilians who were just hanged or beaten or whatever. And so that's what the judge is doing. He's going around trying to try these war crimes. And since Benjamin has witnessed, the aftermath of the hanging of these 8 innocent Germans who had been trying to go to Mexico to basically what is supposed evade conscription and having to fight. The Germans who settled there, a lot of them didn't even speak English yet. And suddenly they're being told to sign up and go fight for the Confederate cause. And so the judge is trying that, and he, tells him to write the story. Well, Benjamin keeps going off about the panther. And so it's a mixture of a story between the murder of these 8 innocent, men, and then his own personal story that's entangled in it, which is the tracking of this panther that maimed his sister and killed his stepmother.
Wow.
Thank you. May I say one more thing? If you haven't been to Camp Verde, the store is just fascinating. It's a little bit like Breed's Hard Store with a bookstore, and maybe you can tell them to get Elizabeth's book. They have it. And then the restaurant is a little bit like Chez Z. So it's worth a trip. It's about 12 miles south of Kerrville. And my grandson loved it because he got a great big Sunday ice cream. He was delighted. Okay.
It's good food. It's good food, and it
really
is
good.
an interesting store. Yeah, it's great.
Tom McCourse, I think, was next.
Yeah, go ahead, Tom.
Sorry, my awareness of you is through Monday and the Which Way Tree. And although the main character's in Which Way Tree, it's easy to answer my question. But if you were living as a settler in the era that you wrote about here, is life just one struggle for survival, or did they ever have fun or do anything?
Well, these characters, it's pretty much, since they're kids
Sure.
and they are left, with nobody, it's pretty much a struggle for survival. But no, there was, those settlements out there. Kerrville was not a German settlement, but, Comfort and, Bernie and a lot of those places. Bandera was mostly a Polish settlement to begin with, but they just had a good civilization. But it's interesting because at the same time that you had the Civil War going on, you were having a lot of skirmishes with the Comanche Indians going on. And so, in that area. So there was, this sense of survival. There's a really great book called The Captured, which depicts a lot of a number of stories of children who were taken by the Comanches. And that was always a risk to these early settlers. But by the time of the 1860s, some of those settlements had really, prospered and had, stores, and the postal service came through and things like that. And so so it was not a bad life. It was, I'm sure like most people in those days, it was a struggle just to stay warm and just to feed yourself, but I think they had their parties. So
There's a question in the chat from John L. Do you have family stories from the Civil War period, and did those influence your characters in the current book?
I don't. I don't have family stories from the Civil War period, and you know, I read a lot of diaries and journals from that period from people who traveled through Texas or fought in the war in Texas. You know, basically, I mean, it wasn't like there were a bunch of battles in Texas. It was more that people were getting, you know, conscripted, and then they were being sent to where the battles were. They were being signed up under, you know, the armies. But Texans, you know, withdrew from the Union. It was not a, you know, a vote that was just a given. I mean, there were a lot of dissenters. Sam Houston, for one, felt that, you know, Texas should not withdraw from the Union. And so there was a lot of controversy over that. But I didn't have ancestors in Texas at that time yet. So I don't, you know, I can't say they would have been here or there with the war.
Gotcha. I'm gonna scan
Another
really
question?
quickly. Yeah, are there any other, go ahead.
So switching gears a little bit, how did this screenplay come about? How did they pick that book, and how did it get in the hands of people that do screenplays and that kind of thing?
So what happened was when I finished the manuscript, I showed it to Steve Harrigan, and he, you know, said that he knew somebody who was working with Robert Duvall and knew that Robert Duvall was looking for material. So he called that friend, and that friend said, sure, yeah, I'll read it. And, you know, if I like it, I'll show it to him. So that friend liked it. And then he showed it to Robert Duvall, and Mr. Duvall was great. I mean, he loved it right off the bat. And he said, I want to make this movie. And so I talked to him, and he said, and this was before I even had a publisher. I mean, this was before I even sent it to my agent, because I had just been showing it to Steve. So he said, who should write the screenplay? And I said, well, Steve Harrigan. I mean, he knows how to write screenplays. He knows this book, and he knows me. And I thought, this way I can have some influence, you know. And Steve didn't have time. You know, he was writing that big history of Texas that he has published recently, which is so great. And so he said, well, I will write it if you'll write it with me. And I didn't know how to write a screenplay, but he, you know, showed me the basics and helped me download the program that you use, that formats everything correctly. And then we wrote it together. And so the screenplay is ours. And then, you know, Bob Duvall was just, I mean, he read every draft we did within 24 hours of our having finished, just right on top of it. Had all kinds of comments, had things he wanted cut, changed, whatever, noticed every word, and, you know, was just amazing. He is still our executive director. We've moved from the original, he was producing, and so was this other friend who was working with him. Mr. Duvall is the executive producer now, and then Steve and I and Bob Burney, who has Picture House, and Edgar Johnston, who's a casting director, have formed a group called Panther Dog, which is we are the producers, and so that's how it's happening. So we're in development now. We're still, you know, looking for extra funding, but we have made some progress and are hopeful. You know, I mean, you never know. Movies are really, really tricky to get made, and they usually don't get made. And so there's always that possibility. But you know, we're kind of hopeful. People, you know, who, I mean, in the business, in the industry, people do seem to really respond to the script and like the story. It's a little difficult to know how to position it, apparently, because it's not a kid's story, and yet it stars two kids. And so that makes it, you know, it makes it, there are no, the term I learned, did not know before, was comps, like comparables. So you try to think of movies that are comparable to this one and that would draw the same kind of audience. And then you know how many people would watch it. And whether or not then it would be, good to make it, I mean, whether a studio wants to invest in it or an individual or whatever. So this one didn't have any comparables, it's just such a different kind of story. It's not really a Western. It's a Civil War story, but it takes place in Texas. It stars these two kids. It has to be violent enough because, the Panther is violent and the scenes with the Panther are violent. So it can't really be a kid's movie. It's kind of, it doesn't really fit the genre categories that are out there. And so it's a little bit of a hard sell in that sense.
Any casting decisions? Have you got Meryl Streep yet?
There aren't really very many women in this. I mean, I was trying to think, could I even have like a bit part of walking through? And I think all I could be would be one of the, grieving German, widows or mothers of the, because it's basically, this story takes place in the outdoors and it's these two kids and this preacher and Mr. Pacheco, Lorenzo Pacheco, who has been accused of stealing a horse, tracking this panther and this notorious panther and that has committed a lot of violence on a lot of people. And so it's in that sense, it just doesn't have a big cast. I mean, it's a small cast. And the kids are in every scene, which makes it a much more expensive movie because, you can only film X number of hours a day when kids are in there. And if you film in the fall or the spring instead of the summer or the winter, you have to, there need to be 3 hours a day of tutoring. And then you've got, the creative makeup that has to be put on and then you drive to the site. So it makes it a very long shoot time where all of the two grown-up stars who would be, better known actors have to be there the whole time. So you're paying for a lot of time that's dead time. So you try to film in the summer always. And I would love to film in Texas, but we don't have the incentives that and rebates that they have in New Mexico. So that's why every Western you see or any, movie like that is usually filmed in New Mexico. They're making a lot of money in New Mexico because they attract and want the movie business. In Texas, our legislature doesn't have that value.
Interesting. Elizabeth, it strikes me that because it sounds like a really collaborative process between you and Stephen Harrigan and Robert Duvall. And I mean, how fulfilling that must have been. But one of the things that occurs to me just listening to you speak, I know there have been comparisons drawn to True Grit, et cetera. But to me, at least in the way that you've talked about it, especially the idea of conceiving it onto screen, it reminds me so much of James McBride's Good Lord Bird, and the child's or young person's perspective. And
that's true.
Yeah. It's very interesting.
And that was, and that's a beautiful book. Yeah, that's true.
And I thought you did a lovely job.
They did. It was good. It was good in film too. Yeah, it really was.
Yes, and Mark Richard was, part of the writing of that process. And so I think they had so some quality work. So maybe of a comparable or
maybe that you're right. That probably is the closest. That's probably right.
Mark has another question.
Tommy?
Is it?
Am I on?
Yeah, go ahead. It's okay. Go ahead, Stan, and then we'll hear from Martin Sue.
Well, I have a comment. When I was in junior high here in Austin, which was quite a few years ago, a mountain lion was in Barton Springs, and we were not allowed to go swimming at Barton Springs. That was in the 30s.
I didn't know that. I'd never heard that. That's wonderful. Thank you.
Well, that's good. You don't know whether I'm lying or not. No, that's a fact.
Coming from you, Stan.
Mart has a question.
Sure. What about To Kill a Mockingbird?
Oh. In what way? So how would you draw the parallels?
Well, it's told through the child.
That's true. That's true. Yeah, and that's you can't
that
beat
was
that
a-
movie. You
Yeah,
can't beat
and the
that
book,
movie.
yeah, yep.
Yep, true.
You're in high cotton.
Broadway.
Very true. Yep.
We're going to scan and see if there are any other questions, if somebody wants to raise their hand or unmute. Okay, I'm scanning really quickly just to see if it's any.
What book are
Drew?
we supposed to gobble up when it comes out again? Your next one?
Oh, okay. So the next one actually is another adventure with Benjamin Shreve. It will be a while. I mean, I haven't finished writing it. And but it takes place a couple years later, 1868, during the period of Reconstruction. And it's another adventure, you know, but it doesn't involve Samantha, his sister. It's just Benjamin. And it's a little bit of a love story, you know, so it's different because he's older. And so that's, you know, it's right now I am, you know, inching up toward writing the last scenes, but then I'll do lots and lots of rewriting before I send it to my agent, who will then send it to my editor, who will then take time and edit. And then, you know, so it's always a long process.
Wow. It does sound like a long process, but so worthwhile. I mean, the whole thing sounds incredibly fulfilling. And at the end that the work produced, I mean, it's been really well received and certainly a testament to our interest here, if that's anything.
Yeah, y'all are great. I mean, this has been fun to visit with everybody.
Well, gosh, thank you. I'm going to scan one more time just to see if there are any questions, but I do want to, I see that we're coming close to the top of the hour. So, gosh, Elizabeth, thank you so much. This has just been absolutely wonderful and we've really enjoyed it. And I hope that when your next piece comes out or something else happens, we will be able to ask you back again.
Certainly. Absolutely. I'd be happy to.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Thanks again for joining us. Again, if somebody missed this, we will have this up available on our website within the next day or so. Thanks again. Elizabeth, this was a pleasure.
Thank you, Tommy. Yeah. And all of y'all, Rick and Joan. Yeah. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.